and welcome to the Centre Think Tank interview series In Conversation. I'm your host, Torrin Wilkins, the Director of Centre Think Tank. Today we'll be discussing peace in Northern Ireland, the future of the devolution settlement, and how we can bring communities closer together. With me today to explore these issues further, I'm delighted to be joined by Baroness Ritchie of Downpatrick. She has a wide range of experience, including being the chair of the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building, former member of the Northern Ireland Assembly and Minister for Social Development, the former Member of Parliament for South Down, a Labour member of the House of Lords and former leader of the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the SDLP. So thank you so much for being with me today, Baroness Ritchie.
Delighted to join you this morning, Torrens, for our discussion about peace, the development of the peace and political process, because both are interlinked in Northern Ireland, but also in Ireland and the relationships between these islands.
Thank you so much. So for my first question, and it was more than 10 years ago now at the Northern Ireland Foundation, you said, we still live apart, we largely socialise apart, and we are educated apart. So do you think the situation has changed at all, and how do you think we can improve it?
Well, that was definitely more than 10 years ago. It was whenever I was Minister for Social Development. I think it was around about 2009. Unfortunately, there's not been much real change. Peace may have bedded in more, but the deep division between Unionists and Nationalists is still there. And can it be improved? Unless there is a level of trust at the centre of the executive, but between the DUP and Sinn Féin, then you will always have those divisions, and that them and us. We have to get over that, and it's about respect for political difference. It's about parity of esteem. It's about all the things that John Hume talked about once in the evolution of the SDLP as we progress towards the Good Friday Agreement.
So do you think, especially with the situation in schools in Northern Ireland, just to explain a bit what you think the situation is there? I know that you have a selective system, of course, with grammar schools in Northern Ireland, something a lot of people in England, I don't think, appreciate. So do you think that situation has got better at all?
Well, obviously, there has been a clamour also for integrated education. And we also have selective education at 11 children who still pass that test, that's transfer test at 11, can go to grammar schools. Other children can go to secondary schools. I think selection is wrong because it puts maybe not only fear, but that idea in a child that you're a second-class citizen in terms of your education. I went to a secondary school, but it didn't stop me going to university. So I think there are opportunities abound, and children should be allowed to avail of those opportunities. And the more pressure you put on a child in terms of education, it creates problems further down the line. So I think you have to have an easy approach to education. Education is a lifelong opportunity. And you said a part of I suppose part of it about improving our situation is about education and to educate children together. That's the other issue. Majority of children are still educated apart. And for example, I myself went to a Catholic secondary school. I perhaps my first time, although I grew up in a rural community, I would have known people of from a unionist perspective. But the first time I really got to know them was when I went to Queen's University in Belfast in 1976 at the very height of the Troubles, and realised they were like me, perfectly normal individuals who had probably the same educational aspirations, job aspirations, but perhaps not the same political aspiration. But it's about respect for that political difference. I'm Irish and want to see a new Ireland. And I also believe that it's my job as a politician, along with others, to persuade people from a different political perspective of the value of us living together. And you cannot create a new Ireland unless you allow Northern Ireland to work first and to ensure that there's respect for that political difference between Unionists and Nationalists. And if you can work together, then it's easier. You gain that respect, there's mutual understanding, and people mature a lot better.
So would you say then the way forwards is about that mutual respect? Is there anything else that we can do to sort of improve that situation and increase those sort of community ties? Especially considering, one of the things is about living apart, about the fact that people, often won't interact with each other. And again, it comes back to that educational point of, what can we do going forwards?
I think we have to build civil society, because people are part of groups outside government and outside Parliament and outside the Assembly. Then they appreciate that people have similar housing problems, they have similar health problems, and they've encountered the difficulties about accessing onto the health waiting lists, getting their children educated. They also realise that the pothole in the road beside them is the same as the pothole in a unionist community. So you have to think, what are our differences, but also of what are our strengths and what unites us and what are the similarities. And I think if you stop thinking in terms of your political aspiration, well, it's very, very important you look at our strengths, our weaknesses, our challenges, and realize that we all have the same sorts of challenges and difficulties.
So now moving on to the peace process, you're now chair of the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building. What can other countries learn from Northern Ireland on the peace process?
Well, other countries can learn from our peace. It was about resilience and the ability to stick at it when it looks doubtful, because our peace processes and our all-night talks happen, shall we say, overnight. And also the introduction of external help, because we had facilitation from President Clinton and George Mitchell, who chaired the peace talks, the European Union. That's why Brexit is such a crazy idea for us, because our peace and political process and the Good Friday Agreement borrowed from the template of the European Union. People with significant differences who were warring in the First and Second World Wars, how they were able to come together and form the European Economic Community. So there was much to learn from that. And in fact, through the Special European Union Programme Body, we were also getting resources to underpin our political and peace process. And also the many people at the top needed to buy in and commit. We had President Clinton, but also we had John Major whenever he was Prime Minister with the Downing Street Declaration, working directly with John Hume and with Albert Reynolds, who was the Taoiseach in Dublin at the time. We had very definitely had Tony Blair, who worked directly with Bertie Ahern. And those people give their absolute commitment and endorsement and support, and were there when those difficult times. So I think other people, other countries could learn from that. And that's the one thing about the Centre for Peace and Democracy. It's about building peace and democracy and what we can give from Northern Ireland and Ireland to other fledgling peace processes. Now, our peace and political process is very different to South Africa. It's different from the very complexity of the Middle East or Ukraine and Russia. But we can tell them about our experience and help that maybe inform them and give them the confidence that it is possible.
So in a previous interview, we actually spoke to Sinead McLaughlin, MLA, who argued about the removal of the veto from the Northern Ireland Assembly, saying that no one party should have a veto over another, and also spoke at length about the Deputy and First Ministers and about the idea of having equal titles within the Assembly as part of reform. So do you think those kinds of reforms would be beneficial for the Assembly, and do you think they would be possible?
Yeah, my colleague Sinead is absolutely right. I agree about the vexatious veto. Also should have always been joint First Ministers. There's a false perception, and this works for the DUP and Sinn Féin, that first outranks deputy, first only creates a divisive tribal contest for who can be top dog, and it unfairly damages the smaller parties like the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist. And in fact, during the recent, in the last Parliament in the Lords, along with Lord MP, well, we tried to get amendments, as did my colleagues, Colin Eastwood and Claire Hanna and Stephen Farry, who was then an MP for the Alliance Party in the Commons, tried to get amendments to that Northern Ireland legislation back in 2022-23, whereby the government would realise that both titles were equal. They can't order a packet of paper clips without the other. That's very simplistic. But they can't sign a document or approve something unless it has approval of each of them. So they are joint and equal. So why not call them joint first ministers? And that would get rid of that problem that we encounter at every election. Make me first minister. That's all you hear, and that's what the election focuses on, which is about tribalism, it's about division, and as a consequence, Sinn Féin zoomed the poll because many nationalists and Republicans believed that was the answer, but it's not the answer because they haven't actually delivered anything. They're joint and equal in every respect, and we have to get rid of that veto, and we have to get back to that sense of equality, what the Good Friday Agreement was all about, and respect for political difference.
So what are some of the problems with the veto? Why has it become such an issue in Northern Ireland? Because it's something that doesn't really exist in any other part of the UK. So
no, it doesn't exist, nor does it exist in the south of Ireland either, because there are different political circumstances. Whenever, for example, if I take it, whenever there is the First Minister thing acts like a Prime Minister, whereas the First and Deputy are equal. And when it comes to an election, the whole cry is, make me First Minister, make our person First Minister. That means we get the top job. And people don't realise that both jobs are interlinked, intertwined. One person cannot sign off a document, an executive paper, without the other, the deputy. And in fact, that has always been the case. So it's that sense of triumphalism, that sense of majoritarianism that we thought we'd got rid of, seems to be still there. So that veto has to go. And in fact, that's also supported by the Alliance Party as well. And it will, I think, help to take the political heat out of the situation and ensure that elections are not about constitutional issues for the Assembly. They are about the bread and butter issues, like the ever increasing and ever spiraling health waiting lists, the poor nature of our wastewater treatment systems. And if you look at that, planning permission cannot be provided for new houses because there aren't the sufficient a number of wastewater treatment works, and they're not adequate anyway. So that does need to be dealt with.
So moving on to funding, and I suppose rather fittingly for the last point, of course, we have the Barnett formula for devolved nations across the UK. And Lord Barnett himself said he thought that the system needed some level of reform and was originally a sort of temporary measure. So what do you think needs to be done? Do you think it needs reform, and what kind of reforms, if so?
Well, the Barnett formula is inadequate. And in fact, we've heard our MPs quite clearly stating that in the House of Commons. But we've also heard MPs from Wales and Scotland making similar points of view. But the agreement around the fiscal floor on the 124% comparator is progress, I'd have to say. But after decades of neglect, after decades of violence, conflict, but also after decades of that focus on the veto, Northern Ireland infrastructure needs a lot more. And it's not just necessarily in health, even though health represents 46% of the block grant. There are other areas. The the financial envelope has not provided for essential investment in water, waste treatment works, doesn't allow connections for all this new house building that's required, and for all the other new schools, all that sort of thing. For example, you take it that the new maternity hospital has been built for 10 years, never opened. And they have now found elements of pseudomonas, which is some type of infection in the water. So they have to deal with all of that. So I believe it needs to be reformed. I believe that we should be given our money on the basis of need. And we should also, I think, and this is a contentious issue, we also need to be thinking if it is reformed and we do get the money, is that sufficient to deliver the services? And we're always, shall we say, lower down the ranks. Our people earn less money than in other parts of the UK, even though they're doing equivalent type jobs and they have good qualifications, many of them university educated, and many of them probably better educated than in other parts of the UK, if I dare say so. And I would also say that, in fact, whenever I was Minister for Social Development, part of our benefit system, they did work for South East England and other parts of the UK, and it was because of their, shall we say, their resilience, but also their diligence, enthusiasm, and hard work, and ability to deliver work in a very thoughtful, but also in a very accurate sort of way.
And finally, so devolution in England at the moment is being expanded with new powers, new mayors, and of course in Wales, they're now expanding their Senedd with new Welsh Parliament members on top. So for the settlement in Northern Ireland, do you think there should be greater devolution, of course, around funding, which we just discussed, but also around any other areas of policy?
Well, normally I would be somebody who would favour Devo Max. And I think politically I would favour Devo Max. But I don't think that the DUP and Sinn Féin have the political or maturity or the even-handedness and equality sense built into their brain psyche to govern more areas. I would not like to see them at this moment in time in charge of taxation or broadcasting, because goodness knows what might happen. Their mentality would seek to look after their own communities, so to speak, whereas we have to be more holistic. And we haven't actually talked about the other aspects. I obviously want to see a new Ireland, and I think Brexit has forced that discussion further. The Windsor Framework is an excellent example of providing protection for our trade, because we can access of course the single market for goods, but not for services. But we're not in it, but we can access it. And we're also in the UK internal market. But the bottom line is that we need that for our protection. So to ask for more power when two parties can't agree with the power they have, and also cannot be seen to be even-handed, I think would be a little bit of folly.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, Baroness Ritchie,